Hey, good morning, and thank you everyone for being with us on this event. This event will give you information on the California ballot propositions and help prepare for the November elections. I am Alice Struffel. I'm the Southern California Director for California Interfaith Power and Light. We are celebrating our 20th anniversary this year of environmental action with the faith community, and we focus on renewable energy, energy efficiency, education, and advocacy. Please check out our website if you are new to us at www.interfaithpower.org. Just to confirm, California Interfaith Power and Light and the Immaculate Heart Community, one of our sponsoring partners, are 501c3 organizations. We do not take positions on candidates, so you will not hear about the presidential race or suggested voting for either candidate. We are allowed, however, to take stances on ballot propositions. So if discussion turns to how we prefer to vote on something, we are in keeping with federal tax guidelines. But mainly, this morning's event is designed for you to be informed about the 2020 ballot propositions and for you to make up your own mind. We are thrilled today to partner with the League of Women Voters. The League of Women Voters has been a longtime colleague of CIPL's. This nonpartisan organization has been active in educating a wide variety of organizations and peoples on election preparation and has already presented this type of event to many other organizations. We're also very happy to partner with the Immaculate Heart Community, a lay community that is focused on justice, action, and spiritual transformation. I myself was just welcomed into the Immaculate Heart Community in June of this year. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Catherine Clare, member of the Immaculate Heart Community and head of the Programs Committee, to speak for a few minutes about their work. So Catherine.
Good morning, Alice, and thank you. I just got a text message from someone who's trying to get into the workshop, so if we can keep checking that, that would be great. Good morning, everyone. I am Catherine Clare, Program Chair of the Immaculate Heart Community, and we have put together this program with Alice called Faithful Voting, and she is, of course, like she said, an Immaculate Heart member. And this year is our 50th anniversary as Immaculate Heart Community. I'd also like to introduce Nan Cano. She is our Vice President, just wave, yes, our Vice President, and she's the former chair of the Program Committee. And so it was her idea to put this on, and so we're very thankful for her. And she will be closing out at the end today's session with thanks to all who have participated. So just a little background on the Immaculate Heart Community. When we introduced the Immaculate Heart Community to others, one of our members came up with a great description. We are spiritual seekers reflecting Christ's message through loving service in the here and now. And here is our official goal statement, which really reflects who we are and what we stand for. We, the members of the Immaculate Heart Community, rooted in Jesus Christ and united with the people of God, commit ourselves to build relations in society which foster access of all persons to truth, dignity, and full human development, and strategically change practices and situations which impede such access, with reverence for all creation in our choice of work and living style, and in our use of time, talent, and money. We hold ourselves accountable to God and to one another for effecting this goal and supporting one another in this effort. That's our goal statement. So if we are grounded in the IHC values and feel these communal values, we will have a heightened spirituality that can help us reclaim the earth. Love is the force where deep change slowly happens. How and what is our transformative work in the world? We are an inclusive group of women and men following Christ and supporting one another in loving service to the world and leaning into the questions that reflect mystery. We do this by working through our ministries, our commissions, and our new Anti-Racism as Spiritual Transformation Task Force. We are always looking for like-minded souls to join us in this rewarding work and our mutually supportive conversations. So in the chat, I am going to put the name of Dorothy Washley, another IHM, who she would be able to add you to her interested persons list. And if you would like to attend an Invitation Day retreat to find out more about our history and ministries, again, I will put her name and phone number in the chat box. Thank you, Alice.
Thank you so much, Catherine. And now for the main event. I am very, very happy to introduce to you 3 women from the League of Women Voters to give us an overview of the California ballot propositions. The ladies are Gisela Meyer, Sue Guilford, and Sharon O'Hara. I'm now going to share my screen, and ladies, take it away. Let me see my screen.
Yes, thank you very much. Is everyone seeing the PowerPoint, I hope? Okay. As Alice said, we are a nonpartisan organization, and this will be as neutral as possible presentation of the propositions on the ballot this year. Most of our information comes from Voter Edge, votersedge.org, and we'll talk a little bit more about that at the end. So if we could just go ahead and go to the first slide, please, or the next slide. Okay, so the first proposition we're going to talk about is Proposition 14, and this has to do with stem cell research. The state of California has been funding stem cell research for the past 14 years, and the money that we previously approved for this has run out, and this proposition is asking for more funding. Next slide, please. So the way it is now, as we know, stem cells are a special type of human cell that is used in research to find treatments for diseases. In 2004, the California voters approved a proposition that was endorsed by, or actually it was started by Robert N. Klein, a real estate investor and a stem cell research advocate. And he asked the people of California to approve $3 billion to pay for research and medical studies using stem cells. The reason for this was that in 2004, the federal government had stopped funding this kind of research, and Mr. Klein felt this was real important, so he got this proposition on the ballot. The original proposition also created the California Institute for Regenerative Medicine, which has been doing all kinds of research for the past 16 years. And now most of that original money has been spent. So this proposition asks for an additional $5.5 billion in bonds to be spent. Next slide, please. So Proposition 14 would allow the state to sell $5.5 billion in new funds, in new bonds to pay for the stem cell research. Some of that funding would be dedicated to particular diseases such as Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and dementia. The administrative costs would be limited to 7.5% of the funds. And the current Citizens Oversight Committee, which has 29 members, would be increased to 35 members. Next slide, please. What are the fiscal impacts? As always, if you're borrowing money, which is basically what a bond does, you have to pay interest. So the total cost to repay the bonds plus the interest would be $7.8 billion, according to the legislative analyst. The state would be paying $260 million each year for the next 30 years. State law, by the way, requires debt payments to be made before anything else. So this would come out of the general fund and would reduce, funding for other things in the state. If the state's stem cell research leads to new medical treatments, the state could get some money to use for patients' treatments. Next slide, please. So the supporters say that the stem cell bonds have led to new medical treatments and important research that should be continued. For instance, I read over the weekend that one of the things that this research led to was a cure for the boy in the bubble disease, where children are born without an immune system. They were able to come up with a treatment using that dealt with the genes that actually cured 50 children of this particular syndrome. Prop 14 provides money that will help fight many serious diseases, including cancer, diabetes, and heart disease. Excuse me. Prop 14 will contribute to the rebound of California's economy. Previous funding attracted $3 billion in matching funds, created 55,000 jobs, and generated $10.7 million in economic stimulus. About $8.5 million has been raised for this proposition. As you can imagine, there's a lot of medical organizations that are in support. There's 97 of them in total, and 10 elected officials also support this. Next slide, please. The opponents say that we can't afford $7.3 million in bonds in the middle of an economic crisis. They worry that the repayment of the bonds will increase the taxes. They also say that the original proposition was meant to jumpstart the program and not to continue supporting it.
Thanks a lot.
In perpetuity. I'm sorry? Okay.
Thanks.
Federal government and private groups are now providing funding for the stem cell research. And there have also been questions about the management, integrity, and transparency of the California Institute of Regenerative Medicine.
Going through each proposal.
Okay. 8 organizations have expressed opposition to this proposition. As you can see, it's the Taxpayers Association, California Republican Party. Both the Orange County Register and the LA Times oppose this. It's always interesting when both of them oppose, but only 250 has been raised in opposition. Next slide, please. So, yes or no? If you vote yes on Proposition 14, it means you are voting for the state to sell an additional $5.5 million in bonds to support the California Institute of Regenerative Medicine and their research. If you vote no, the state will not be selling additional $5.5 billion in bonds. And next slide, please. Proposition 15. This is maybe the biggest one, according to George Skelton at the LA Times. This is the most significant proposition on the ballot because it would make a big change in Proposition 13, which, as you know, is kind of a sacred thing in California. It's the third rail that you don't want to touch. But this proposition would actually create a big change in how Proposition 13 is run. So next slide, please. So when it was passed in Proposition 13 in 1978, Proposition 13 limited property taxes on all properties in California to 1% of the purchase price, with annual increases limited to 2%. This limit stays until a property is sold. When a property is sold, then the property is reassessed based on the purchase price. Um, Generally, residential property is sold much more frequently than commercial and industrial property. And also commercial and industrial property can be sold in ways that don't affect the tax basis. This is done through some corporate techniques where there are multiple owners and therefore there's a change of ownership without the property tax going up. Money from the property taxes goes to local government services, cities, counties, public schools, special districts, libraries, fire departments, etc. Next slide, please. So what would Proposition 15 do? Proposition 15 would create what is called a split roll, where commercial and industrial property would be treated differently than residential property. So the taxes, the property taxes on commercial and industrial property would be based on what the property is worth now, instead of small increases on its original purchase price, which in some cases is, many decades old. Commercial and industrial property would be reassessed at least every 3 years. These new rules would apply only to people and businesses that own more than $3 million in commercial or industrial property. There would be no change to taxes on residential homes. That means your private home. It also means apartment houses. It means nursing homes, mobile home parks, and agricultural lands. None of those would be affected by this proposition. It would also lower taxes on business equipment such as machines or computers. Next slide, please. What would be the fiscal impacts? It is estimated by the Legislative Analyst's Office that local services would get an additional $6.5 billion to $11.5 billion more in property taxes each year, starting in 2025. Why starting in 2025? That's because there's a phase-in period that would allow counties to reassess the commercial and industrial property in their jurisdictions, which, as you can imagine, will take some time and effort. Of the additional money that is raised by Prop 15, 60% would go to local governments, and the rest would go to schools and community colleges. And as I said, the counties would have to reassess commercial and industrial properties, and so the measure sets aside several $100 million to do this work. Next, please. What do the supporters say? Supporters say that the wealthy companies and business property owners should pay their fair share. They should pay property taxes based on what their holdings are really worth. They say that funding is desperately needed for local services such as police and fire departments, and certainly for our schools. Rental rates and the prices of goods and services are set by market rates, regardless of what landlords and businesses pay in property tax. And this is, of course, in response to arguments that this proposition will increase prices for everybody. There are a grand total of 522 organizations that support this. As you can imagine, school districts, teachers associations, California State PTA, the Los Angeles Times, 669 elected officials also support this, and almost $48 million has been raised to support this proposition. Next, please. Proposition 15 opponents say that this would create the largest tax increase in California history, that raising taxes will increase the cost of everything that people buy, including food, gas, and healthcare, because the businesses will pass on their higher costs. And they say that it will hurt small businesses that are struggling during the current pandemic. 351 organizations are adamantly opposed to this. They include Chambers of Commerce, the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association, Building Owners and Managers Associations, the Orange County Register. A total of $37 million has been raised to oppose this. Next, please. So Proposition 15, yes or no? If you vote yes, it means that California will create a split roll where commercial and industrial property will be reassessed to its current market value on a periodic basis. If you vote no, things will remain the way they are now. Commercial property will not be reassessed to market value. Okay, thank you. And now we're going to go on to the next proposition, which will be taken by Sharon O'Hara.
Sharon, if you can.
Have we lost Sharon? Oh, I know she has some glitches with her computer sometimes.
Do you want to take that, Gisela?
Sue, do you want to take this one? And I'll take the next two. Did we lose Sue?
Sure. Okay, let me get my, all right. Prop 16. Prop 16 is a legislative constitutional amendment. What that means is that the legislature passed it by 2/3 vote, and then it has to be approved by the voters. And so that's why it's on the ballot. Now, Proposition 20 would allow for diversity, that is consideration of race, sex, color, ethnicity, or country of origin as a factor for public employment, education, and contracting decisions. Next slide. Is Sharon back?
But I'm back on now, so maybe it'll be okay. I'm so sorry. Bye-bye.
Is Sharon able to take over?
Yes,
Sharon?
but I'm not doing, I'm going to do I'm doing 18. So
Okay, all right, I'm doing 16 and
I'm
17.
sorry
All
for
right,
the-
so,
Sorry for the.
all right, I'll continue with 16. In 1996, the voters passed Prop 209, which was also a constitutional amendment, which bars using affirmative action by which they meet, including such factors as race, sex, color, ethnicity, or country of origin as a factor for public employment, education, and contracting. So in other words, this would just undo Prop 209 that was passed in 1996. Next slide. Prop 16 would allow but not require affirmative action considerations, and it would not allow for quotas. Next slide. The fiscal impact would be minor. It would really depend, any cost would depend upon decisions made by state and local programs. Next slide. Supporters say that Prop 16 will help women and people of color who continue to experience discrimination. We are a very diverse state, but when you compare hiring practices against population groups, it's clear that there is a mismatch in some of these areas. There are quite a number of supporters. There's been 13.4 million donated in support. No, it's 17, excuse me, I'm looking at the screen. The money keeps going up. In fact, this is a good point, good time to remind you that Voters Edge has the most current money information about money, including the amounts of money and who donated it and who is supporting and opposing it. So I urge you to take a look at that. Next slide. The opponents say that this would be a step backwards and it would introduce new discrimination that would require expensive bureaucracies to enforce. A little over $1 million raised, 57 organizations, including the Republican Party and some newspapers, including the Orange County Register. Next slide. Yes or no? If you say yes, then you would repeal that section of the Constitution that introduced by Prop 209 and thus allow considerations, affirmative action considerations for public employment and education decisions. A no vote would mean that those restrictions would stay in place. Next slide. Proposition 17 is also a legislative constitutional amendment. So this, in some states, just a little background. In some states, people in prison can vote. In other states, once you go to prison, you lose your ability to vote forever, essentially. We're somewhere in the middle. So this question is, should people who are on parole, that is, they've finished their prison term, be allowed to register to vote and vote? Next slide. So right now, after someone is in prison and they finish their prison term, they spend some time, usually 3 years, on parole. When they return to society, there's certain rules they must follow, and right now they can't vote. Next slide. So Proposition 17 would allow those people who are on parole to register to vote, and in some cases, they could even run for office. Next slide. There would be, the fiscal impact would be updating the voter system. There would be some one-time costs in the hundreds of thousands of dollars to update voting records. And then each county would have some updating, and it would really depend upon how many new voters registered to vote. Next slide. The supporters say that people who are on parole pay taxes and are working and otherwise participating in the community, and that they ought to be able to vote. And they're rebuilding their lives, and voting should be a part of that. There are 54 organizations, including Free the Vote Coalition, the ACLU, LA Times. About $1.2 million has been raised. Next slide. The opponents say that you don't want to allow violent criminals to vote before they've completed their entire sentence, including parole, and that parole is a time to prove that they've really reformed. No money has been donated in opposition. There's just a few organizations in opposition. Next slide. And so, yes or no, a yes vote would restore the ability to vote to those who have completed their prison term but are still on parole, and a no vote would just keep things as they are. Next slide.
Okay, so now we're looking at Proposition 18, and Alice, I'm just going to say next, or if what I'm saying doesn't match what's on your slide, just please keep moving the slides. I'm trying to make this pretty fast-paced, so to speak. 18 would allow 17-year-olds who will be 18 by a general election to vote in the primary and special elections in that election cycle. How it is now is that 17-year-olds can vote only if they turn 18 by election day. Next. And next. There would be some fiscal impact. Next. Next slide. Because all of the records and voting procedures would need to be updated. It could cost up to $1 million or so statewide. Next. Supporters say that allowing 18 to 17-year-olds to participate in a full election cycle would help them develop a lifetime habit of voting. And as it stands now, there are 18 states that have similar laws. Next. When 17-year-olds can't vote in the primary, it does discourage them from voting in the general election because they don't pick those candidates, since we have a winner take all the top two primaries. So that's another reason to be in support. I'm getting a little ahead of myself here. The opponents say that if a 17-year-old is voting in a primary, they're possibly voting on tax issues and debt issuance. And that's not right, because they have limited life experiences and they're not paying taxes. And the other point they make is that perhaps they would be influenced by teachers and other adults. So next slide, please. So if we vote yes, we're looking at letting eligible 17-year-olds who will be 18 by the time of the next general election to vote in a primary or a special election prior to that general election. And if we vote no, then no one younger than 18 will vote in any election. Thank you. And then here is Proposition 19. Proposition 19 is about how we handle our property tax and how we can move it from one property to another. Next, the way it is now, homeowners over 55, those severely disabled, or those whose house was destroyed by a natural disaster, home in the same county or a participating county in California without paying higher property tax. They may do that only once in their and only if the new home costs no more than the old one. Also, a residence can be transferred to a spouse, a child, a grandchild without changing the taxable amount. Next slide. What Proposition 19 would do is to change and allow more eligible homeowners to take their tax breaks with them when they sell anywhere in California. And they can do that up to 3 times in a lifetime. And they could apply their tax break to a more expensive property. One thing that 19 does is to crack down on the transfer of a home from a parent to an adult child. A child who inherits keeps the same property tax assessment only if the home is their primary residence. Additionally, Proposition 19 expands the once in a lifetime transfer that used to be just to natural disaster victims to those who are victims of wildfires. And I think we can all appreciate how that might impact so many Californians. The increased state tax revenue would be used in statewide fire suppression, and those efforts would also, and the reimbursement of wildfire agencies' firefighting costs. Next slide. The fiscal impact would be that local governments and schools would see increases in tens of millions of dollars. And there could be more money from transfer and state income tax revenues as well. And those monies would help local school districts and then might save the state tens of millions of dollars. Next slide. The supporters say that expansion of Prop 13 rules for the transfer of residential property tax values protects older homeowners and creates new opportunities for renters. It closes those tax loopholes on inherited properties, with the increased revenue going to fire protection, schools, and local governments. The opponents say that 19 is a tax increase that was rejected by voters in 2018, and that 19 could hurt families who cannot afford to pay the taxes on a reassessed or inherited property. Next, please. So in summary, if we vote yes, we'll allow eligible homeowners to transfer a property's taxable value to a more expensive home in California up to 3 times. It will eliminate the transfer of taxable values of inherited properties unless those properties are the heir's principal residence or a farm. A no vote will be opposing this constitutional amendment and therefore continuing to allow eligible homeowners to transfer their tax assessments within counties to homes of equal or lesser amount only once in their lifetime, and that all inherited properties would continue to be eligible for property tax savings. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Sharon. And now I'm going to take Proposition 20. Proposition 20 deals with our criminal justice system. During the past 10 years, several laws and propositions have been passed in an effort to reform our criminal justice system, both to make it more fair to all people and also to reduce the prison population, which the court said was much too high. Some people, though, feel that these measures have gone too far and would like to make some changes. Next slide. Thank you. So the way it is now, during the past 10 years, as I said, the voters and lawmakers have reduced punishments for people convicted of some non-violent theft and drug crimes. Nonviolent and non-sexual offenders were shifted from state prisons to local jails in order to reduce the overcrowding in the state prisons. Several non-serious and non-violent crimes were defined as wobblers, which means they could be charged either as a misdemeanor or a felony, depending on the circumstances. And DNA samples were not collected from people convicted of misdemeanors. Next, please. What would Proposition 20 do? It would undo parts of the crime laws that were passed by lawmakers and voters over the past 10 years by limiting lighter sentences. It would authorize felony charges for specific theft crimes that are currently chargeable only as misdemeanors, including some theft crimes where the value is between $250 and $950. It would create two new crimes, serial theft and organized retail theft. It would also change the factors that can be considered for early release from prison, and especially for people who are convicted of some felonies. It would limit the early release. The state would be able to collect DNA from adults who are convicted of some misdemeanor crimes, such as drug possession, shoplifting, and domestic violence. What would be the fiscal impact? It would depend on how the law is applied and if it is challenged in court. Because it would result in an increase in the prison population and change the way the post-release supervision is handled, it's estimated that it would increase state and local costs by tens of millions of dollars annually. The supporters say that Prop 20 reclassifies certain crimes like assault with a deadly weapon, date rape, and child abuse as violent. It would not increase the prison population. It would only ensure that people convicted of these crimes serve their full sentences. And they also say that it will help stop car break-ins, shoplifting, and other theft that has been on the rise. 114 organizations support this proposition. As you can imagine, there's many law enforcement organizations, also the Republican Party, the California Board of Supervisors, the California Grocers Association. 400,000 roughly has been collected to support this proposition. Next, please. The opponents say that Prop 20 will roll back many of those prison reforms and that have been put in place in the last 10 years and will cost taxpayers millions of additional dollars. It would slash the mental health and rehabilitation programs that have been put in place to help prepare people for their time out of prison and prevent them from going back to prison. And it would result in extreme sentences for petty theft that will disproportionately impact vulnerable minorities. 96 organizations oppose this proposition, including the ACLU, the ACA, the California Democratic Party, both the Orange County Register and the Los Angeles Times. Almost 6.5 million has been raised to oppose this proposition. So, yes or no on Proposition 20? If you vote yes, you're going to change the way that some of the laws are enforced. It would create new laws. It would allow, it would limit early release for people convicted of some felonies and allow DNA collection from adults in more cases. If you vote no, you'll leave things the way they are. Penalties for theft-related crimes would not change. There would be no change in releasing inmates from prison early, and DNA samples would not be collected from those additional people. Next. So Proposition 21, another hot topic, has to do with rent control. As you can imagine, this is a big issue in California right now. This would allow local governments to enact rent control on residential property. Next, please. So the way it is now, as we all know, housing costs in California tend to be a lot higher than in other states. So several California cities have instituted rent control laws that limit how much landlords can increase the rents each year. State law prevents rent control on single-family homes and housing built after February 1, 1995. The reason for that is because it is felt that by doing this, you're encouraging more construction rather than discouraging residential construction.
Mm.
Landlords can charge any amount they want when a new renter moves in, and they must be allowed to increase rents enough to make a profit every year. A new state law that was passed last year limits rent increases to 5% each year, depending on inflation. And this law again applies to housing that is more than 15 years old and will be in effect until 2030. Next, please. What Proposition 21 would do. Cities and counties could pass rent control rules for housing that is more than 15 years old and could limit rent increases when a new renter moves in. Landlords could raise the rent by up to 15% over 3 years on new renters, plus any increase allowed by local law. This would only apply to landlords who own more than 2 housing units. And the local rent control laws would still need to allow landlords to make a profit each year. Next. What would be the fiscal impacts? It's estimated that it would decrease the money made from state and local taxes. Governments could see decreases in the high tens of millions of dollars each year. And the effects would depend on how many cities and counties pass rent control laws and how the landlords would respond. Supporters of Prop 21 say that even small rent increases force many families into homelessness, which creates a burden for the entire community. Seniors and veterans are already dealing with financial problems that limit their resources for food, medical care, and other needs, and that Prop 21 still does guarantee landlords make a reasonable profit. 97 organizations support this proposition, and about $28 million has been raised to support it. The opponents say that this is a rerun of a proposition that was on the ballot in 2018, and that 60% of the Californians already rejected that proposition, and they should reject this one also. That rent control results in less available and less affordable housing, and that Prop 21 will stop new houses from being built. It will cost jobs and hurt the economic recovery. There are 149 organizations opposing this, including veterans groups, building industry associations, chambers of commerce, Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association. $56 million has been raised. Thank you. Next. So if you vote yes on Proposition 21, you are allowing local cities and counties to impose rent control laws with certain restrictions, still allowing the landlords to make a fair rate of return. If you vote no, then the current limits on local rent control laws would remain in place. Okay, Proposition 22 goes to Sue.
Okay, Proposition 22. This would exempt app-based transportation and delivery companies from providing employee benefits to certain drivers by allowing them to remain as independent contractors. At the same time, the companies would adopt some labor and wage policies unique to these drivers. Next slide. So right now, an independent contractor can decide when and where and how much to work, while an employee has a schedule set by the employer, who also provides certain benefits and protections. Rideshare and delivery app companies such as Uber, Lyft, and DoorDash hire drivers as independent contractors, but a state law passed in 2019 requires that the drivers be hired as employees rather than as independent contractors. Next slide. So Prop 22 would allow these rideshare and delivery drivers to continue to work as independent contractors and would require companies to pay drivers 20% more than the local minimum wage for driving time and provide some benefits for drivers who drive more than 15 hours a week. And cities and counties would be prohibited from putting new rules on the companies. Next slide. The fiscal impact would be small increases in income tax paid by rideshare and delivery company drivers who presumably are going to be earning more. And then by keeping these drivers as independent contractors, rideshare and delivery companies would likely earn higher profits. Next slide. So arguments in favor of this is that rideshare and delivery drivers want to work as independent contractors. And if they are classified as employees, there will be fewer drivers and jobs, longer wait times, and higher prices. And that this requires the companies to provide some benefits and safety precautions. 110 organizations in favor, $186 million raised in support. That is not a misprint. Almost every dime of it was put up by the rideshare folks, starting with Uber at a little over $51 million. So that's why you've been hearing so much about this. Next slide. The opponents say that the rideshare companies don't want to pay benefits to drivers, and it will eliminate some basic workplace protection. And it will be also, and I don't know if this is which side this argument should be on, but it will be virtually impossible to change this measure because it requires a 7/8 majority vote by the legislature in order to make any changes. 12, 13, almost 14 million in opposition. A number of unions are against it, and including 43 other organizations. Next slide. So yes or no? Yes, the drivers would remain as independent contractors with some wage and benefits from the companies. No, the companies must hire them as employees. Next slide. And now we're on to another hot one. This looks like deja vu. We are not back in 2018. Yes, you did see this in 2018. Because something similar to this appeared on the November 18 ballot. This would require that the dialysis clinics have a physician on duty while patients are receiving treatment, offer the same level of treatment to all, and report infections on a regular schedule. Next slide. So the situation right now is when your kidneys stop working, you need a treatment called dialysis that takes about 4 hours, 3 times a week. California has about 600 licensed dialysis clinics, most of which operate 6 days a week with extended hours, and you have to see your doctor every month. Dialysis treatment is paid for by Medicare, Medi-Cal, as well as private insurance. Next slide. So Prop 23 would require that dialysis clinics have a licensed physician on duty while patients are receiving treatment. If that isn't possible, there are exceptions possible to have either a physician's assistant or a nurse practitioner. And clinics would also have to report infections to the state on a regular basis, and they couldn't discriminate against patients based on how their treatment is paid. And they would have to notify the state if hours or services are reduced. Next slide. So the fiscal impact, little difficult to determine, but dialysis clinics costs would go up because of the requirement to have a doctor, nurse practitioner, or physician's assistant on duty during treatment. Healthcare costs for the state and local governments would go up because reimbursement rates for Medicare and Medi-Cal would go up. And some of these costs could be offset by increasing licensing fees. Next slide. Yes, on Prop 23, the supporters say that dialysis is a dangerous procedure and there should be a doctor, nurse practitioner, or physician's assistant on duty. There's 6 organizations supporting this, or 9 organizations now, excuse me, its numbers keep changing. Including several unions and the California Democratic Party, 6.2 million raised in support. Next slide. The opponents say this would force dialysis clinics to close, costs would go up, and it would make the doctor shortage even worse. $93 million in change raised in opposition to this. Almost all of this put up by the dialysis companies. Next slide. So yes would a yes vote would mean that you would have a doctor or other medical professional, nurse practitioner on duty while patients are treated. There'd be the same level of care for all and regular reports on infections. A no vote would mean current standards would continue. Next.
All right, here we are with words you'd like to hear. In conclusion, these are the last two propositions, and the Prop 24 amends consumer privacy laws. Right now, next slide, please. Right now, businesses collect information about buyers and users of their products in order to sell that data to other companies or to use it for their own services. Next slide, please. The 2018 California Consumer Privacy Act gives people more control over the data collected. Consumers can ask that their information be deleted, not sold, or deny permission for a company to sell that information, sell information about their children. And companies can't charge more to customers who ask for more privacy. Next slide. What Proposition 24 would do is that it would go further than the 2018 Privacy Act. It would make companies subject to privacy rules and higher penalties. More companies would have to give consumers new rights to limit the sharing of their personal information and to correct inaccurate information. Additionally, 24 creates a new consumer protection agency. Next slide, please. The fiscal impact of Prop 24 is that the Consumer Protection Agency and the enforcement would cost the state up to $10 million or more yearly. Fines on those companies breaking consumer privacy laws would help to pay for the state's costs. Next slide, please. The supporters of Prop 24 say that this measure would protect kids by giving the state more power to go after companies that break children's privacy laws and those that track everything we do online. It also strengthens the existing protections established with the new Consumer Privacy Protection Agency. Next slide. The opponents say that 24 requires consumers to opt out one by one from some companies that they wish to stop collecting their information. Also, if a consumer is not in a loyalty program, those consumers asking for relief from collection of data might wind up with worse connections, slower downloads, and more of those famous pop-up ads. Additionally, opponents say that employers could keep gathering data about things like their employees' pregnancies, religion, or political activism. Next slide, please. So, if you vote yes on Proposition 24, you will be letting consumers tell businesses not to use their personal data for anything more than providing the services that they buy. And it would charge higher penalties for those companies that violate privacy. And it would create a new California Privacy Protection Agency, which would take over some of the enforcement, which right now is being done by the Department of Justice. If we vote no, then the current Consumer Privacy Act protections will remain the same. And now, the final proposition on the ballot, Proposition 25, is a referendum to eliminate cash bail. Next slide, please. The way it is now, next please, is that in 2018, the legislature passed SB 10, which was to do away with our money bail system. But the law did not go into effect because this referendum was on the ballot. The bail companies figured out that it was likely to pass, so they had immediately qualified and filed a referendum ready to go for the 2020 ballot. The next slide. What Proposition 25 would do is get rid of cash bail. Judges could have wide discretion to decide who could be released prior to trial and would perhaps have to check in with a probation officer or wear a tracking device. And those deemed to be a danger to the community could still be held in preventative detention. Next slide, please. The fiscal impact, if 25 passes, is that the re-release process would increase the workload for state trial courts, the DAs, and public defenders, and that those costs could be in the mid hundreds of millions of dollars annually. But counties would save tens of millions of dollars because they would have lower jail costs. Next slide, please. The supporters say that the current system favors rich defendants who can easily make bail and keeps poor or defendants of color in jail. And as our governor has stated recently, only the United States and the Philippines use this system. Additionally, Prop 25 would enact a system of risk assessments. Those risk assessments set out non-monetary conditions for release, and the highest risk arrestees would still be remanded into custody and would not be eligible for bail. Prop 25, excuse me, sorry, Prop 25 opponents, next slide please, say that it will cost taxpayers hundreds of millions of dollars a year. It will overburden costs, create new bureaucracies, and make our communities less safe. And in summary, next slide please. When we vote yes on Proposition 25, we give voter approval to eliminate the cash bail system and put in place a set of risk assessments to decide whether a detained suspect would be released before their trial. And if we vote no, then we reject the law and we keep bail system as it is. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. And now I just want to go real quickly over a couple of several websites where you can get more information. Voters Edge is a joint project of MapLight and the League of Women Voters. You can get information, nonpartisan information about candidates from the local, state, and national level. You can get detailed information about the propositions, including the list of all the supporters, all the opponents, and exactly how much money they're spending. And there's also information about how you can vote on this website. The next one is the Orange County Registrar of Voters. That is, sorry, we are from Orange County and we love to brag about our Registrar of Voters, who is a rock star and has everything under control. But I'm sure you have something like this in Los Angeles County too, where you can check your voter registration status, find out your closest vote center. Well, in Orange County, you can sign up to get updates on election results, which will undoubtedly be coming for weeks after the election. If you are interested in finding out what the League of Women Voters recommends on some of these propositions, the League has taken positions on 8 of the propositions. If you would like to see their recommendations, you can go to lwvc.org, click on ballot measure voting recommendations, vote with League, and they will give you their recommendations on the 8 propositions, plus an explanation of how they reached their decision. And finally, Ballotpedia, the encyclopedia of American politics, is a place to go if you want to get really, really detailed information. They have, it's a little harder to find the California propositions, but it's worth digging around because they have the full text, they have explanations, they have a readability score on the proposition, lots of background information, polls, samples of newspaper editorials, and lots of other data. So those are 4 places where you can get more information. And that is the end of our presentation.
Thank you so
Gisela.
much for everyone. Thank you so much for that presentation. We have about 10 minutes, but I know that people are very curious to ask some questions here. The first one is, would you mind telling us League of Women Voters recommendations for these right now? And just go through the propositions really quickly.
I would have to look that up. Give me a minute and I'll look it up.
Okay. Great. And then will you send, I have this now on my desktop, this presentation. Do you mind if I send it to everyone on this call?
That's fine.
Wonderful. Okay, so that's terrific. I have a couple questions, and anyone, please, I know that people on this call have many questions about the propositions because there's a lot going on here that affect people's lives in a very real way. So please type any questions you have into the chat box, and I will ask the ladies from the League of Women Voters. One question I do have on, I think it's the Prop 23, the dialysis center. I always ask myself the question, what problem does this proposition solve? I can see them very easily for the first four propositions. There are clear things, but I'm confused on the dialysis center. What is the problem now that it solves?
I think that is an excellent way of looking at something. And one of the things, as Gisela said, you can go into Voters Edge and see a detailed list, and it's really easy to find this information, of who is supporting, who is opposing, and who has put up the money. Now, I have to caution just overall, and this doesn't just apply to this measure, it applies to others as well. It is very easy to look at a measure and say, well, these companies are against it, I'm for it. That's not, don't fall into that trap. But you might want to go in and look, because you can see some detailed explanations about that measure. But I think that the question you pose is a really good way of asking yourself about it.
Thank you. There was one question about the ability to transfer the property tax to people that inherit the house and stuff.
Yes.
From Allison, does current transfer tax law not include fire as a natural disaster?
That's correct. That's the addition of wildfire, especially since we've had so many and continue to have them.
So right now it does not include
That's
fire
correct.
as a natural disaster. Okay,
Yes.
so there's the answer to that. And as we know, for everyone on the call, you can transfer this PowerPoint presentation far and wide to anyone you know. Are there any questions from our attendees right now? And Gisela, do you have the list of the propositions?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
And the reason that the league does not take positions on every proposition is because we don't just go, yeah, that sounds good, or no, we don't like that. We study issues very, very thoroughly and carefully and take positions and then look at the propositions against our positions and decide whether we are opposed or are supporting. So I just wanted to let you know. So on Proposition 15, which is creating the split roll, the league votes yes. On Proposition 16, which is, oh, I forget which that one is. That one, remind me real quick. 16 is diversity, allows diversity as a factor in public employment, education, and contracting. The league is in favor of that one. Restoring voting rights to people on parole. The League is in favor of that. The League is always very big on voting rights. The League is also in favor of providing voting rights for 17-year-olds who will be 18 by the time of the general election. No on the Prop 19 property tax breaks. That's the one that changes the rules about property taxes when people move, people who are over 55 and are in those other special cases if they move, or if the property is inherited. They say vote no on that one. Proposition 20, they call it the rollback on criminal justice reforms. They say no. They like the criminal justice reforms that are in place. They don't want those changed. Consumer data privacy, they also vote no on that one. And on Proposition 25, ending the cash bail system, they say yes. They're in favor of that one.
Okay, thank you so much, Gisela.
You're
I'd also
welcome.
like to include that California Interfaith Power and Light has taken a stand on 4 of the propositions, 15, 16, 17, 18. We see those as pretty clear justice issues, and we are voting yes on those. And we have not taken a stance on any other propositions right now. So it is 11:11 right now, time check. Does anyone else have any questions, just to put them into the chat box?
Alice, can you repeat the California Power and Light positions?
Sure. So for Proposition 15, 16, 17, and 18, our steering committee is recommending a yes vote on those. And the other propositions, we have not taken a position. Okay, we have a question for the 17-year-olds. Does the League of Women Voters see any drawbacks for the yes on this? And this is for 17-year-olds to vote in a primary election if they're going to be 18 by the time of the general election.
I'd have to defer to Gisela whether or not she has seen anything else on Voters Edge. The only thing that the opponents were concerned with was the undue influence by adults, and they had a kind of as a former teacher, I was a little bit insulted in the fact that they were concerned that teachers would somehow go out of their way to influence young people in their classes about which direction they would prefer the young persons to vote. But I don't know anything more from the league itself other than what Gisela said, which is that we tried to engage as many people as possible in the voting process, and to start earlier means that they perhaps would have a better chance to have a lifelong interest in voting and feel more engaged.
I can tell you what it says on the league website partially. It says Prop 18 provides an opportunity to engage youth at a moment of high interest while they are studying government and beginning to exercise their voices. Furthermore, encouraging them to vote during a time when they have established ties to their communities will set them on a path to future participation in our political process. Once voting begins, it continues as a lifelong habit.
Thank you. And we have about 3 minutes left. We might take 4. There's a question. Does the proposition about stem cell research overlap with fetal tissue concerns?
That I do not know. I would have to do some research on that.
You're talking about the
That's stem,
dialysis? No, I don't.
the
I
stem
think they're
cell.
completely unrelated.
Stem cell research.
So stem cell, in your estimation, is unrelated to fetal tissue?
I'm not sure. I can't say. I would have to research that.
All right, that is a good question. One person says, can you say more about Proposition 22? I am confused about that one still.
Which one?
One of the things I would say is go in and look at who's put all the money up. the almost every penny of that money has been put up by the, Uber and Lyft and so on. And I think that, so clearly they feel like this is in their best interest. If you go into Voters Edge, there's much more detail. The full pros and cons that League does is on Voters Edge. It's also very easy to see the list of supporters and opponents, as well as who has put up how much money. And I think those issues can be useful to look at.
Great. And we're just going to go 3 more minutes. I apologize. Folks are making sure that when they fill out their ballot for voting, how can they confirm that their ballot drop box location is legitimate?
I know in Orange County, the drop boxes have a very particular design. You can go to the Orange County Registrar's website and see what they look like. They have information in 3 languages, and they have the seal of the Orange County Registrar Voters on them.
Great. And Susan.
Yes, the list of ballot drop boxes will be on the website for your registrar of voters.
Yes.
Orange County and LA County are both voters' choice counties, which means we have vote centers, but they also have lists of where those ballot drop boxes are located. And even in non vote center counties, I was happened to talk to my sister, and we noticed on their registrar of voters website, it specified where they're putting ballot drop boxes. So
Sure.
that's, and I would imagine that they will have pictures. Certainly Orange County has pictures of those boxes on the website. So look at what they look like, and look at the locations.
Thank you so much. And I'm actually going to end it here. Thank you so much for the League of Women Voters for putting this on. Thank you for our co-sponsor, the Immaculate Heart Community. And before I introduce someone just for a closing reflection, if anyone has any questions about voting, about mail-in voting, about where do I put this, please go to, and Susan is going to say it, and also send me an email, and I'll make sure that I find the person that's going to answer this. So Susan.
2 questions. First of all, I heard Neil Kelly talking yesterday about the fake ballot drop box issue. He said that our local DA and also the California Secretary of State are on that issue right now. Also, everybody should sign up for ballot tracking, which you can do. You can do it through Voters Edge, but you can do it through your local registrar of voters. And that way you'll get a message when your ballot is mailed to you, which has already been mailed, but also when they get it back.
Great, thank you. So thank you for everyone who is on this. Thank you for everyone who's presented. If you have more questions, look at those resources, send me an email. We will make sure that you get your questions answered. And just for kind of a closing reflection to put us in the mood for prayerful voting, I'm going to turn it over to Nan Kano, who is the Vice President of the Immaculate Heart Community, for a final reflection. Nan.
Thank you, Alice. Thank you, everyone. What great content and great commitment from the League of Women Voters, from our community, and from Interfaith Power and Light. It's a friendship we want to keep going every voting cycle. I think we see our vote as an act of faith and an act of hope. And the closing thought comes from an interfaith spirit, the Zen master Norman Fisher, And this is part of his translation of Psalm 72. Endow power with justice. Let it embrace uprightness so that people can see uprightness before them and the downtrodden can be raised up in justice. You respond to the needy when they cry out, to the sufferer when there is no hope. You care for the poor and the broken. You give strength to the strugglers who answer the questioners, who alone animate wonders. Your unsayable name is glorious and fills the world to the brim with its brightness. May it be so. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Nan. Thank you, everyone. Take care. Be safe.
Thank you. Great presentation.
Thank you. Thanks, Alice.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.
God bless you.
Yeah, God bless you. Thanks, Alice. That was great.
Sherry?
Hmm.
Never mind. Bye-bye.
Bye.